Now, this was a brain twister. It came in from a financial advisor, and I want to set up the case for you in terms of what's going on here. So, what's essentially happening, let me pull up a slide. So, here's a slide that kind of explains the setup. I went over this at a conference I was at this week, and I wanted to share this with you in a case study because it requires that you think outside the box just a little bit, but it shows you how powerful the software is to be able to handle just about any situation that might come up. So here is the situation. The client is getting divorced, and really the estate is a $4.8 million estate, and there are really two main assets. There's a $2.8 million house that currently has no mortgage, and there's a $2 million investment account. So the client had actually come into some money through the sale of a business, had paid the mortgage off, had put the rest in an investment account. This is what they have. The advisor, and what he's trying to do to help the client, and obviously to help himself, is he wants to know if the client would be better off liquidating the investment account and paying the wife off in full, or would he be better off taking some of this equity out of the house and financing the settlement. Now, there are two key things here to know about this case. The advisor wants to keep the house. He's emotionally attached to it, and the wife doesn't want it, and it's something he's put a lot of blood, sweat, and tears into. The house was appraised at over $4 million just 3 years ago. So, for one, the client feels like the house is dramatically undervalued right now, and he would like to not sell the house. He'd like to hold on to it and keep the house. He's got the income to support it. And he feels like he's got a good shot at getting close to $4 million if he keeps the house, over the next 10 to 15 years. Secondly, the wife has agreed to settle for $2 million. So in this situation, that's the payout. So the easy decision would be just to liquidate the investment account and pay her out. The advisor keeps the home with no mortgage, but then we know that he's going to be liquidity-wise very challenged. But there's no other way for him to settle right now without selling the house and using proceeds from the sale of the house to pay the $2 million to the wife. So that's the setup. And the question is, again, very simple. Should the advisor really want to keep the house? He could do that. Would he be better off? Because if he wants to keep it, then he would either have to borrow against it or he'd have to give up the entire $2 million investment account to settle with the wife. So let's take a look at how we address this using the software. In the BarSmart software, it took me a minute. I had to sort of scratch my head and say, okay, so this essentially would be a refinance transaction, right? And on the add details, there's no additional money that's coming from anywhere. It's just, this is a refi for a divorce payout, of $2 million. So I could say divorce payout, $2 million. That's going to be my plan title. That one should be pretty easy to remember. In the situation here, we've got the client name. I changed the name, obviously, just called it divorce payout. The income is $324, 38% tax bracket. We have a mortgage, and the mortgage is on that current property. So when I click on the details, I've got the property worth $2.8 million, primary residence. There is no current mortgage. It's all paid off, so this is all zero. And I'll just leave this zero for now, because if he keeps the property and refinances it, he'll have the same taxes whether he refinances or not. These would all be the same. So I just left him at zero to keep it simple for the client. Now, what we did to think about how would we model this in an interesting way is we added a liability called other, and we called it a wife payout. And it's $2 million. There's no payment, there's no rate, but we owe a balance of $2 million, and we need to pay this off. So we just set it as yes. So that allows us to show the current mortgage with no liability and the current liability of the wife of $2 million. And our important objectives, advisor and client are trying to figure out if he should pay out the wife from the investment account of $2 million and liquidate that to avoid selling the house, or use home equity and refinance on cash out and retain a portion of the investment account through borrowing against the property. That's it. That's how we set it up on the Manage tab. Now, when I came to the Borrow tab, it was actually pretty easy from there. We kind of shrink up the current liabilities. So we don't really need that necessarily, so I just shrunk that up. And I called this first one, uses $1.25 million in house. So he could pretty easily get about a 45% LTV cash out refinance to a cap of $1.25 million. So that's the most that he was able to find for this particular client. And they were looking at about a 5.25 conservative, or that was about the best rate that they found in this so far. Okay. Now the alternative here, as we set up, is use a $2 million investment account. So in other words, the property value is $2.8 million. There is no mortgage. So what we have up here, if I expand this again, is we have a mortgage that's paid off, but we have this liability of $2 million that we need to pay off. So we say yes and yes, we've got to pay this $2 million liability off. So here we go. So we have, again, one scenario, we use $1.25 million of the equity, 45% to borrow against the property. Here, we don't borrow anything against the property. And let's compare these two. So remember the three questions, you'll hear this from me again and again and again, is first question is, what's the cash impact at closing? Well, let's go to the right for a second. If the client uses the $2 million investment account to pay off the liability, which is $2 million, then he has no cash left over at closing. He still has his house, but he has no cash left over. If he borrows, in this case, $1.25 million, okay, then to pay off the debt, the liability, he would have to come out of pocket an extra $750,000. That makes sense? So you're taking $1.25 million is coming from the actual loan, and then $750,000 is going to have to be at the closing table as cash at closing. So he's got $2 million available. That's going to leave him $1.247. Why $1.247? Because we estimated $3,000 in closing costs to close this transaction out. So if I use $1.25 million in my house to pay off a $2 million debt, I'll need the $1.25 million from the house plus $750. That's going to leave me $2 million in cash that I have available in this investment account. If I don't do a loan, I need $2 million at closing. That's going to all come from the investment account. There's no money left over. So the first question is, what's my cash impact? And I can see very clearly here, there's no cash left over, $1.247 million left over. Second question is, what's my cash flow look like? If I don't use the equity in the house, there is no mortgage, there's no change to my payment here. Okay, I'm going to pay nothing each month. There'll be no interest payment. I'll pay the taxes and insurance. Again, I left those at zero since they're going to be the same either way. If I come over here and borrow $1.25 million, I'm going to have to pay interest of $5,469 a month and principal of $1,434. My net payment's going to be $6,903 out of pocket. So you can see the cash flow difference here. $6,903 negative flowing out if I do this loan, positive $6,903 if I don't. So there is a benefit to paying the client, the wife, $2 million in the investment account up front. If I pay them the full $2 million up front, then I'll save that $6,903 a month. And what could I do with that $6,903 a month? I could invest it, right? So if the advisor gave up all of his cash up front, paid the wife off, he would be able to rebuild his cash flow at the rate of $6,903 a month. Now, but we have tax benefits, right? He has the ability to deduct up to 1.1 or more of that interest on that mortgage. So in reality, he's got a tax benefit here because the tax savings is going to be about $2,078 in his tax bracket. So his real after-tax payment is $4,825 a month. So in reality, he's spending $6,903, but after tax, it's going to feel like $4,825. So to be fair, if he's going to rebuild his cash, he can't rebuild it at $6,903 a month. He'd be rebuilding his cash at $4,825 a month because that's what he's really spending on an after-tax basis in this situation, estimate-wise, to be able to go in here and do this. So first question, do we answer it? Sure, you can have $1.247 million left over or no cash left over. How about cash flow? There's going to be negative $4,825 a month coming out in terms of cash flow, or positive $4,825 that you can use to rebuild your wealth. And then the real question that the advisor and the client really wanted to answer is, which of these would be better based on their current situation? What do we need to know to answer this question? Well, we need to know the time frame, and the time frame is 15 years. We need to know the property appreciation rate as an estimate. And the advisor and the client feel like 2% is reasonable. They've seen a big drop down, a $1.2 million loss in value. He feels like conservatively at 2%, that house value would grow back to about $4 million over 15 years, and he's willing to wait that out. His mortgage balance, this $1.25 million that he's financing over 15 years, would drop to $858. There's no balance here because there's no borrowing here. So the first thing I can see is after 15 years, he's rebuilt, or he's got about $2.92 million equity in that house at the end of 15 years. Here he's got about $3.778 million. Why is that? Because the property value is going up either way, but he's got no mortgage liability. So he's going to have more equity in the house and consequently a lot more money tied up in the house, but he'll have an extra $858, $656 in the house. Now we want to look at the payment impact over time. Well, he's going to spend $851 in interest. He'll put $391, $344 in principal. That's what reduced this balance here. He'll have tax savings of $323, $424. So we get at it from a payment standpoint. Over that 15 years, he'll spend $919,000 net to have that property from a payment standpoint. If he doesn't finance the property, he'll be able to invest $919,035 over 15 years. The real question is then, which of these is best for the client? So we need something from the advisor, and the advisor felt comfortable that over 15 years that they could earn 7% on an after-tax basis, which is less than what they've been earning on the account over the last 15 years that they've worked together. So this opening balance of $12.47 million or $1.247 million, that means if he buys this house, if he keeps this house and refinances to pay off the wife $1.25 million, he's going to get to keep that in his investment account. Here, he has no investment account balance at closing. He'll be able to put away $919,000 over 15 years, and at 7%, that is going to grow to $1.601 million. So when we look at his wealth, you can see that if he keeps the house, does no mortgage, uses the $2 million from the investment account to pay off the wife, he'll have $3.78 million in equity in the house. He'll have $1.61 million or $1.601 million that he'll build up from the $919 that he saves over 15 years plus the interest. So his equity, his net wealth will be $5.379 on a relative basis over 15 years. Compare that to borrowing $1.25 million in this situation, and you can see that up to this point right here, he's got less equity and he's got a lot more payments. So this doesn't seem like it makes a lot of sense. But what's the big difference here is he retains $1.247 million in his investment account. His equity on the house will be the same because it'll be worth the same. In terms of the value, he'll have a mortgage balance here. So you'll see here that the savings and investment account is grown here to $3.5 million because he started with $1.247 million and growing at 7% without making any additional payments to this account. Just looking at the $1.247 million growing at 7% in 15 years, he'll grow that to $3.55 million. The net equity then, the property value minus the remaining mortgage balance, plus the net equity in the investment account, $6.4 million. Here, the property value with no mortgage still, and a regrowth of that account to $1.6 million gives that client $5.3 million. So this is an incremental $1.1 million, or you could say in either of these two situations, he's got an extra $1.1 million over that time period. If you divide that by 15 years, that's an average monthly savings of $19,737 or an average of $13,665. Now, it's hard to call this a savings, right, in any situation, but what we were able to do is use the software to create a liability that had to be paid and then model it in two different scenarios. One being a scenario where we borrow a portion of that settlement out. We couldn't get the full $2 million out of the house, and I don't think you'd want to because you want to make sure that he's comfortable with the cash flow situation he's in today. He's got a 26-26 front and back ratio here, so that's comfortable from a suitability standpoint, and the loan to value is around 45%. In my situation, I would recommend that the client borrow $1.25 million out of the property, make the payments out of current cash flow, and that could be worth about $1 million over time. And again, you could sit here and do any kind of test you wanted if you see, well, what would that break even need to look like? At what point would it not make sense for him to do this? we could slide over here and look and see right around 3%. So if the advisor earns 3% or less after tax over 15 years, it becomes pretty much a watch for this client over time. But if the advisor can in fact earn that 7% target ratio, there's an incremental $1 million for the client, plus the peace of mind, and for this particular client, the opportunity to be able to stay in that property over time. Hope this helps. It was an advanced case study, but I did want to share it with you so that you could take a look at it and see if you've had other situations where you might need to create a liability that needs to be recovered or paid off as part of a strategy. Hope you have a great day.